ahead and get started. We want to welcome you to the July Zoom workshop / presentation. My name is Bill Loico. I am a master food preserver, and I have with me two other master food preservers, Colleen Young and Linda Driver. And just a couple housekeeping things. If you're not, excuse me, if you're not on mute, but I think you all are, please go ahead and mute yourself. And then along the way, please feel free to ask questions by way of the chat room. And if you have a question, just go ahead and ask the question, and then one of us will do our very best to get you a very quick answer. Oftentimes when we have chats and we have questions, folks chime in with their experiences and their answers. But when you're looking for your official answer to your question, be sure it's been answered by either myself, Colleen, or from Linda. So we appreciate you all being here. We appreciate you taking the hour or so that we have this morning. And we are going to go ahead and we are going to get started. As soon as I admit Pam, there we go. Welcome.
Go
Pam.
ahead. I'll do the admitting, Bill.
Okay. So let's go ahead and do this. And go to here. So again, welcome everybody to our pickling presentation today. As I said, we are all master food preservers located here in San Joaquin County. For those of you not from California, we are in the breadbasket of the world in the Central Valley area. And we have a plethora of fresh vegetables and fruit that are available here in the area. And preserving this fresh produce is really important, and pickling is just one of the ways in which we can do that. There are two kinds of pickled produce, and basically what we do is we use acid, vinegar, and salt to lower the pH of a vegetable down to a point where we can use water bath canning or steam bath canning, which we'll talk about later. But there are two kinds of pickling. There is a regular pickling, which just uses an acid, in this case, vinegar and salt. And the other one is a fermentation process where we encourage microorganisms to grow, and in the process, they sort of change the flavor and texture and appearance. Today, we are not going to talk about fermentation. We're simply going to be talking about what we would typically consider pickling, and that is using a vinegar, whether it's a refrigerated pickling or whether it is a canning to make them shelf stable. That's what we're going to be talking about today. There's a couple of things relative to pickling that we should take a quick look at. Fresh pack pickled produce is typically covered with a hot boiling spicy vinegar solution, but there's no brining, there's no overnight, there's no taking your whatever it is you're going to pickle and sitting it. You're just going to pour this hot spicy vinegar solution over it. However, there are some things that are fresh pass pickled which do require brining. I will tell you that in my world, brining means that I have to do something for a really long time or overnight. So I tend, although I tend not to do brining because I just want to start and get done and get it over with. Fresh pack is usually very easy. It's canned in a water bath. It's processed in a water bath or a steam canner, excuse me. You can also use low heat pasteurization, which we'll talk about. And in order to allow the flavor to develop, you really want to let something stand 4 to 6 weeks. And the key to that is, if you make a number of jars, you can open up one jar in 4 weeks. And if you like the way it tastes, then you can go ahead and eat what you've done. But it gives you an opportunity to test along the way, how long does it take before I really get that optimal flavor? Believe it or not, you can pickle fruits. And there are some pictures here of some things we're going to talk about, some pickled fruits today, but you can do all kinds of things. And they give you a sweet and sour kind of flavor along the way. But you can pickle anything, and if you don't see it anywhere, try to do some research through reliable resources, and you'd be surprised in some other parts of the country things that you're able to pickle. Relish, very easy to make. In one of my very first pickling experience, we made a corn relish. Now here in the Central Valley and in some places, you can get fresh corn, and you can take that corn off the cob and you can make a corn relish. For those of you that like corn relish and run out of it from your fresh corn, the nice thing about corn relish is it can be made really easily and quickly with frozen corn. Chutney and sauces. Linda is our chutney expert, and it's a mixture of fruits and or vegetables, and it's a nice side dish. It's also a good topping, and you can make them anywhere from a mild or very hot. Refrigerator pickles. You get some choices. You can either ferment them or you can use vinegar to lower the pH, but they're not heat processed. In other words, they're not shelf stable, and therefore you can't leave them on your kitchen counter or in your kitchen cupboards because they will go bad. But they do well for 3 or 4 weeks in your refrigerator. So if you're harvesting your own crop of cucumbers, you might do a few of them and then put them in a refrigerator and then go out and harvest a few more rather than having to wait for your whole crop to come in. Some things to think about when you're doing pickling: make sure that your fruit and vegetables are fresh, tender, crisp, free of blemishes, no mold. And the key here that we have always said as master food preservers is bad fruit does not make good produce or good product. So if you've got peaches that have lots of soft spots on them, or pears that tend to get bruised a lot, those are not going to get any better just because you pickle them or process them. In fact, with peaches and pears, it's even good if they're slightly underripe. So when you go to the farmer's market, look for the hardest peaches and pears that you can find, and you'll have a better opportunity. Cucumbers. There are lots of cucumbers. There's the big long ones. There's the ones that are covered in plastic. But there's also a pickling cucumber. It tends to be smaller, 3 to 4 inches, and it gives you an opportunity to be able to have them fit inside a jar that you're going to process. The kind that you use in a salad, you're not going to get the results that you like. So if the cucumbers you're growing in your backyard are the ones that you would normally use for a salad, you're not going to get the same kind of results that you would expect to get from something being pickled. Don't use a waxed cucumber. And if this is your own local harvest or you go to the farmer's market, be prepared to can the day it's harvest. The sooner you can pickle and process the produce that you want to pickle, the fresher it is, because everything starts to decay a little bit or go downhill a little bit right after it's picked. Locally here at our farmer's market, we have one on Sunday, and they tend to pick on Friday or Saturday. So even though we go to the farmer's market and it's fresh produce, it could already be 2 days from harvest. So be ready to process as soon as you can. You want to find the uniform size because that makes it fit into the jar better. And you want to find them that are kind of straight, like the ones you see in the picture here. If you get the ones that have sort of a J shape to them or a curve to them, it means that you're not going to be able to put as many inside your jars. One of the key things to remember, a last bullet point we have down here, is just before you start to pickle, remove a 1/16 slice from the blossom end of the cucumber. The blossom end of the cucumber contains some enzymes that will soften the pickles. And if you're looking for a crisp pickle, one of the first things you want to do is you do want to cut off that blossom end. So for me, the question always was, if I get a cucumber from the grocery store or farmer's market and the stem's not attached to it, how do I know which is the blossom end and which is the stem end? And sometimes I just cut off both ends. That way I know I got the right end. But here's a picture for you. And if you look on the picture on the left, you'll see an indent right here in this, at this particular end. That's the stem end of the cucumber. If you look on the right, you'll see how it's rounded, and you'll see a small little brown dot. This is the blossom end. It's from this end that you're going to want to cut a 1/16 off so that you can remove and prevent the enzymes that are located in this end of the cucumber from making your cucumbers more soft. Vinegar is always an issue. And the reason it's an issue is because we need to make sure that the vinegar that you're using has 5% acidity. And you can see in this picture down here underneath the label vinegar, you can see right in here, it says 5% acidity. But if you use a wine vinegar or a rice vinegar, while they have good flavor, they may not have 5% acidity. So you have to make sure that you're using a vinegar with at least 5% acidity. Different kinds of vinegar will give you different kinds of results. If you use an apple cider vinegar, keep in mind that because it is not clear and it already has a color, then your pickled product is also going to have maybe a color change to it. White distilled vinegar is clear and colorless. Wine and malt, they give a different flavor, but the key to remember is it at 5%? If you can't find the vinegar, the acidity percentage on the jar of your vinegar, then don't use it. Go back to the store and find one that says 5%. And our recommendation is don't use homemade vinegar because the acidity level is unknown. And master food preservers are always using tested recipes to make sure that the product that we make is going to be good. So one of the reasons we use a 5% vinegar is because vegetables have a pH that is higher than 4.6. They're considered what we call a low acid food. And typically, when you preserve a low acid food, you have to use pressure canning. And the pressure canning is another whole process from a workshop we did a couple of months ago. But if you use 5% vinegar, you're able to lower the pH of the vegetables and some fruits down below 4.6. And that allows you then to be able to use a water bath canner or a steam canner to be able to preserve your pickled product so that it is shelf stable. We want you to be sure that you use reliable resources for your recipes. We will give you a list of some reliable resources. And then at the bottom here, it says, do not dilute the vinegar. And the biggest reason that we want to be sure that the pH is low is because there's this hidden enemy when you're doing food processing called Clostridium botulinum. And Clostridium botulinum is a bacteria that's well known here in the Western United States. It's everywhere. It's in the soil. It's you can't avoid it, even if you washed, did your best scrubbing. It's still there. The problem with this little bacteria guy is that it produces a toxin in the absence of oxygen, and that's exactly what you're doing when you're processing through a water bath canner or a steam canner. Is you're putting your produce, your fruit, into an oxygen-free environment, and what happens is it creates this toxin, and the toxin causes botulism, and botulism is really quite a quite terrible thing to have happen to you. It can lead to death. It can lead to blindness. It can lead to some paralysis. If you come to a workshop face-to-face, we have lots of stories that we can tell you about people who have preserved something inappropriately and then served it to friends and family, and many of them got sick. One of the things about this bacteria is it is inactivated by heat. So it's important to know that you preserve things properly. It's just a picture we don't need to see. Here are some foods that, if they are improperly canned, can provide a breeding ground for the Clostridium botulitum, and that's vegetables, meat, fish, and poultry. If you don't can any of those things, then you really don't have anything to worry. But if you want to venture into pressure canning and you want to figure out how can I preserve these kinds of things, then you want to follow good recipes so that you be sure that everything you're preserving is safe. Some other things: smoked fish, cooked unrefrigerated low acid foods, baked potatoes, and then if you bake those potatoes and then hold them at room temperature. I'm sure many of you have gone to the church or family picnic, and you got there a little late. Everybody else arrived around noon. They put all their stuff on the picnic table. You got there around 3 o'clock, and the potato salad is still sitting out on the picnic table, usually uncovered, waiting for you to take your scoops of potato salad. Please be careful that all these things are taken care of properly. You can prevent the Clostridium botulitum from causing a problem by following lab-tested recipes, use good equipment, and then if a recipe that you're following calls for a pressure canner, you have to use a pressure canner. And a pressure canner is not a pressure cooker. They are two different items. You can go onto our website, which we will give you a link to, and on that you'll be able to view the video from the pressure canning workshop that we did. So if you want to venture into pressure canning, you'll have an opportunity to do that. Let's talk a little bit about the ingredients that we're going to use when you do some pickling. Typically there is sugar, and you can use almost any kind of sugar. Just know that it's going to affect the flavor, and if you're using brown sugar, it may change the color as well. So there's lots of things, lots of kinds of sugar that you can use, and as long as it's sugar, you're okay with that. But just know that it may not provide you with a clear a pickling juice, and it may be colored, and it certainly will add flavor. There are also some recipes that you can find that allow you to do a sugar-free pickling, and by that you use a sugar substitute. The recommendation here is only use a sugar substitute where recipes were developed for that. So if you're looking to do, because you know somebody that needs to watch their sugar and you want to pickle something for them, be sure to find a recipe that allows for you to be able to use these sugar substitutes.
Bill?
Yes.
Before you go off on to salt, a question was had about, can honey be used? I didn't find any recipes with honey in them, so I will tell
Honey
you.
could be used, but again, as we have always said, search to see if you can find an approved recipe. And at the end of this presentation, but also when we send you this presentation as part of the video, the list of resources will be at the end of the presentation, and you can use those. One of the easiest things to find some approved resources is whenever you're going to Google something, look for a university website. And usually university websites end with the 3 letters edu. So if you want to find an approved recipe, let's say you're a hunter and you want to know how to preserve elk, you might find a really good recipe out of Montana. If you want to preserve salmon, you might find a good recipe out of Washington or Alaska. So just kind of Google what it is you're looking for, and see if you can find yourself an approved recipe. I will make a note to myself to see if we can find some honey alternatives. And if we do, then we'll be able to post that so that all of you will have that information. Let's take a look at salts. The key to salt is make sure that it does not have any anti-caking agencies. And so what do I mean by that? So when you go to the store and you buy that blue box of table salt, and you're trying to get your daily dose of iodine as well, that iodized salt has an anti-caking agent to it. And it does that so that it doesn't clump together. There are some things that you can get. They come in a red box and they're kind of kosher salt, and it's a flake. The problem with that is that the density is inaccurate. It's not consistent. I said not inaccurate, it's not the correct word, but the consistency of the density of flake salt is not always the same. So you want to stay away from that as well. But basically, you can go and you can buy boxes and bags full of pickling or canning salt, or you can use a kosher salt as long as it is not in flake form. Salt can be omitted also from fresh packed pickle recipes, as long as it does not act with the acid to help provide a restriction or an inhibition for microorganism growth. Your vinegar to water ratio must be at least 1:1 to be sure that you have a good product, good safe product. And sometimes you don't need to add extra seasoning to compensate. And other times you need to add extra spices, because if you take the salt out, salt is a flavor enhancer. And if you take the salt out, then you may need to add something to compensate for that to bring the flavor out. So we're not talking about fermented pickles today, but if you do ferment pickles, salt cannot be omitted from those recipes. Okay. Spices. Spices are great because people get a chance to sort of experiment with what they like. Do they like something spicy? Do they like it mild? You can sort of experiment with your own taste buds. But the key is you want to make sure that your spices are fresh. And you can tell that by just putting some in your hand and crushing them and then smelling them. If it's not a strong smell, then that means the spice may have aged out, and you might want to get some new spices. It's best to store them in airtight containers in dark places. It's also best to use whole spices. Some will have you put them in a cheesecloth bag and cook them in boil them in with the vinegar, and then have you remove it. Others will simply allow you to put the spices in the bottom of the jar as you're adding your whatever the produce is that you're going to pickle. Our recommendation is that you do not use powdered spices. because they are likely to darken your fruit, and they're also likely to make your liquid be very cloudy. Dill, if you can find fresh dill works really great in making dill pickles. Colleen loves using fresh dill. I, on the other hand, tend to use a dill seed, and they both work really well. And as you can see, a teaspoon of seeds equals 1 head of dill. But when you're using the dill head, it also adds to an aesthetic view of your pickled jars. Garlic. Garlic is great, and you can use fresh or uncured bulbs. If you've got an uncured bulb, you need to let it sit around for about up to 4 weeks before using it. One of the things you need to know is that if you're using an uncured garlic, in the process, that garlic in your jar may turn green or blue or purple. That will fade away at times, but you need to know that that's not a safety issue. It's just that you have a young, uncured garlic that you've used. And it's important to know that turning color, green, blue, or purple, is actually quite okay. If you want to use some of the minced garlic that you can buy in large tubs because you're someone that likes a lot of vinegar, just know that 1 teaspoon equals 2 cloves, and use your garlic accordingly. We're going to talk a little bit later about firming and crisping agencies, so I'm going to go ahead and sort of skip over this. Linda's going to cover crispy and what to use going forward. But I will tell you this: alum, which our parents and grandparents used to make firm pickles, is no longer recommended. You may be able to find it, but it is no longer recommended by master fruit preservers as a firming or a crisping agent when you're making pickles. It's best to use soft water. If you have really hard water in your house, you might want to go and get some bottled water or a water softener, because hard water can cause cloudiness and not the color that you want. If all you have is hard water, then you want to boil it and let it sit for 24 hours. That way the sediment will settle to the bottom, and then simply pour it off and use the clear water. Generally, oils are not recommended in canning. The oil creeps up the side of the jars and it interferes with the sealing of the jar. Some recipes do call for oil. Pickled, as you can see here, pickled 3-bean salad, marinated mushrooms and marinated peppers. And if the recipe calls for an oil, then you can go ahead and use an oil because that's what you're supposed to do. And any vegetable oil will work. However, you want to use a polyunsaturated, which is more stable, such as canola, olive, or safflower oil. Colleen's going to talk a little bit more about equipment as we get to that part, so we'll continue to move on. Some of the utensils that you're going to use, you want to make sure that that there's no chips, no cracks in your enamelware. And you basically want to use something that will not react with vinegar, the acid, or with your produce. So you want to stay away from aluminum, copper, brass, galvanized, or iron. And the spoons you want to use are stainless steel, wood, or plastic. Sometimes you need a scale because you'll find a recipe calls for 3.5 pounds of plums or 4 pounds of tomatoes. It's best to have a scale that you can then weigh and have an accurate product. There are lots of thermometers that are out there. If you need to water, if you're going to do low temperature pasteurization, and we'll talk about that also, the key to that is that you have to monitor the temperature of the water. It needs to be 180 to 185 degrees, and you have to hold it steady at for 30 minutes. So you need a thermometer that you can put inside next to your jars so that you can monitor that temperature. So Colleen's going to talk about water bath canning. She's going to talk about steam canning. And can pickles be pressure canned? And the answer is no, it's not recommended. And the reason it's not recommended is because if you can imagine taking a cucumber, a little 4-inch cucumber, petite little thing that it is, and then putting it in a pressure canner at 240 degrees for 60 minutes, what is it going to do to that poor little cucumber? You will not like the results at all going forward. So, well, 1 second here. Sanitation. We usually talk about this in our workshops at the very beginning. You want to make sure that where you are working is clean. Your hands, surfaces, cutting boards, knives. Make sure that everything is nice and clean going forward. When you're going to make pickles, it can be really easy. It can be very simple, but some things require pre-treatment, and pre-treatment could be hours to overnight. So be sure that you read the instructions before you get started, so that you follow the right steps, so that if you have to do some pre-treatment, that you're ready to do that and you understand the time commitment. Remembering that heat processing destroys organisms that might cause spoilage. It also inactivates enzymes that could affect the flavor, the color, and the texture. And again, Colleen will go over the 2 kinds of ways in which we preserve things. I mentioned briefly low temperature pasteurization. We did do a couple jars this year for this workshop where we did low temperature pasteurization. Again, the key 180 to 185 degrees. You have to do it for 30 minutes. There is no altitude adjustment necessary because everything is temperature control. You have to make sure the water's at 185, and you have to make sure that you do it for 30 minutes. If the water gets too hot or the water gets too cold, meaning higher than 185 or lower than 180, then you have to sort of start all over again. So it's not something that you can start, you're at 180 degrees, and then you can walk away and come back 30 minutes later. You need to make sure that the temperature stays the same. So here's a little warning for folks. Because of the lack of pasteurization, there are some safety concerns around fermented refrigerator dill pickles. And so therefore, pregnant women, the elderly, immune compromised individuals, and those most susceptible to listeria infections should not eat fermented refrigerator dills right out of the refrigerator. And so we no longer recommend doing fermented refrigerator dill pickles. So because I think we know people that are either fall into one of these 4 categories, or we might fall into one of those categories ourselves. So we don't recommend fermented refrigerator dill pickles anymore. The other thing is we also want you to stay away from old family recipes. If you have an old family recipe that you really like, find an approved recipe and compare your family recipe to the approved recipe. Sometimes the only thing that is different is a spice or 2. And so that turns out okay. But when you're looking at like the one on the right for bread and butter pickles, you can see that it's cucumbers, onions, and green peppers. It's also it got lots of spices in it. So you just need to find a recipe and do some research on your own to see if through the approved resource area, you can find one that matches your old family recipe. If you can't find anything that matches an old family recipe, our recommendation is to not use that recipe. So there are several websites that you can go to that you can, reliable sources. We have some others that are available as well. So if you're not finding what you want on any of these, you could shoot us a note, shoot us an email, and in doing that, we have another whole list of approved resources that we use as Master Food Preserver volunteers to do our research for our canning and our pickling. So with that, before I stop sharing this particular screen, are there any questions, any other questions that may have come up, Linda?
Let's see. I was just about to answer in the chat because some people got disconnected, and I wanted to let them know that they will be able to watch the video later. It takes some time for the processing for the whole presentation, but when it's done, we send out an email to everybody who registered, and they get all of the access to the videos and all the resources that we use. So I think that answers that. And I think you answered a lot of the other questions as you were doing it that we didn't answer in the chat. Because Colleen and I have both been doing it. What I think that, and I think it's a good time to redo it. And you mentioned it. When you mess with things like, okay, messing with the vinegar is not okay, whether it's the acidity or the amount or anything else. And then the reason for using the pickling salt is because you don't want other flavors. And the things that give different salts different flavors are the things that could go really wrong in your jar of pickles because it's mixing with other stuff. And so all the people who want to use different kinds of salt, that's the reason why we don't recommend doing that. So I think that's it. Colleen, do you see any that we didn't answer?
No, I don't.
I think
trying to keep up with it. So,
okay, somebody asked about a recipe for pickled peaches, and if we don't have that in our handouts, that would be one that I think you could find through the approved sources, the National Center or one of the university outlets. So,
and someone answered that for Vicky regarding pickled peaches, and I just want to make a comment regarding Ball recipes. There was a point in time when Ball cooperated with university programs to provide tested recipes, but Ball has since been sold to a couple of different companies that are no longer cooperating with universities to test recipes. In fact, in their latest book that has come out, they actually say in doing some canning of some things that you can use fresh lemon juice. And as we have said in the past, we want you to use a bottled product, and we do that specifically for consistency of acidity. Same way with vinegar. We don't use homemade vinegar because we want consistency of vinegar at 5%. So Bob Lowe, I see you have a question. If you'll go ahead and just enter that into the chat, we'll go ahead and answer that for you that way.
Right.
And go ahead.
With that too, Bill, when we give recipes that we got from Ball, we're using them from the time period. We all have books that are from the time period when they were tested.
Absolutely.
So if we post it, it was tested. Yeah.
And just keep in mind that everything that you get from a master food preserver has been a tested recipe. we just use that so that we know that when you make a recipe that's a tested recipe, nobody's going to get sick. And the
Okay.
answer to Vicky's question about what is the time period, I don't know offhand, Vicky, but I can certainly let everyone know.
Yeah, I know my books are all in the right time period, so I'll look
Yeah.
at the copyright and post that. Also, let's see. Some things that you shouldn't pickle is things that will fall apart. So like you had the picture of the watermelon. It's the watermelon rind that you pickle. Nobody would want to try to pickle the
Yeah.
watermelon itself because that would be not good. And okay, it's not the universities that have a cooperative extension are the land grant universities that were started by Abraham Lincoln. And they have a cooperative extension that is tied to master food preservers. And I think in all 50 states.
Yeah.
And
Let me answer a couple other questions. Bob Lowe says the cheaper pressure canners don't appear to have a thermometer on top. I'm guessing this is an important thing to have. Pressure canners don't necessarily need to have a gauge on top to tell you the pressure inside. What a pressure canner needs to have is a vent, and it also needs to have some way in which you can determine what the pressure is inside that pressure canner. So if it's not a weighted pressure canner or it's not a gauge pressure canner, then it's not going to be one you're going to want to use. And remember, we're not using pressure cookers, but we're using pressure canners. Suzanne writes, what about bottled lemon juice? Bottled lemon juice is consistent in its acidity. So any brand of lemon juice would be good. Chances are the one you bought at Costco is probably less expensive. And then Vicky writes in about questions regarding updated books, and that's something that will go farther. And it says, how can you reduce added sugar when pickling fruit? Follow a recipe that allows you to preserve, to pickle with a lower content of sugar. If you don't have a recipe that will allow you to do that, then you have to do the follow the recipe as it is written, and go forward from there. And the last question before we turn it over to Linda, a Ball electric canner. We have an electric canner that we have used in the past. It's just another version of a water bath canner, except that it's electric as opposed to putting it on your stove and going that way. So with that, let me turn it over to Linda, and Linda's going to talk about pickle crispness.
Okay. Let's see. Do you remember what view do I want on PowerPoint, Bill?
So if you're going to do a PowerPoint, you open up your PowerPoint and then you go to start video. Start
video?
Mm-hmm. Or start the slideshow. Sorry.
I'm going, wait a minute. Okay, so I need to go over here and do I share screen first or do I start the
share screen first?
Okay, bear with me, folks. Okay, now I'm looking at how to make. Okay, that's not the one I want. Here we go. That's the one I want.
Okay, and then up above you'll see slideshow, Linda. Right there. So click on slideshow. Slideshow. On the brown menu. Up.
On the brown.
Two to the right from transitions.
I'm not seeing what you're talking about.
Go on yours. Keep moving your arrow over. Go to slideshow right there.
Okay.
Click on slideshow.
Oh, I'm seeing, you were seeing one thing, I was seeing another. Okay. And
then on the far side, it says play from start.
Play from start.
Go to slideshow again. Go to slideshow and then go over to play from start. Play from start.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience, everybody. Okay, what makes a pickle crunchy? Well, the reason why we went with this, okay, I don't want to go there yet, is I think that making a crunchy pickle has been something that people have been trying to do forever, because most of us would prefer a crunchy pickle over a rubbery pickle. and it's easy to get the rubbery pickles. So when we do it, I made a list, and I'm not going to say that this is anything more than a partial list of the things that people have tried in order to make crunchy pickles. And the things that we sort of have an idea affect the crunchiness. One is the time from harvest to brine. So if you buy cucumbers that were picked sometime last week, you're probably not going to get crunchy pickles, just because they've been sitting for a long time, and especially if they didn't have the blossom end cut off, because that's where those hormones are that are telling it to start rotting. And if you didn't have those hormones, then we would be about several miles deep in non-rotted vegetable matter. So that wouldn't be good. The size of the fruit or the vegetable. So if you think about a cucumber or a zucchini or something, as it gets bigger, it gets a lot more fleshy and seeds get bigger. And so that little compact 3 or 4 inch cucumber is much more likely to be crunchy than the great big fat one that you would end up with if you didn't see it under the leaves and you picked it really late. The temperature during storage. So if you leave the bag of cucumbers sitting in your car all day, you're not going to get the same thing as if you bring them in and put them in the refrigerator. The temperature during processing, we tried that. Bill did the experiment, and we did a non-official, semi-scientific test. It wasn't scientific, it was semi-scientific test. And so we tested the pasteurization against the water bath or steam canning processing and have results on that. Grape leaves. I can remember my mother stuffing grape leaves in jars, and Bill liked to stuff grape leaves in jars. And alum was a regular thing that went in pickles when I was a kid. And then a commercial product called Pickle Crisp. So we decided to, between the three of us, test some. So this first slide shows the pickles made by Bill, and the 2 jars were the low temperature processing that took you how long, Bill? 30 minutes or so?
Yeah, low temperature takes 30 minutes.
At least. And the steam canning, once you pack the jars and you put them in the steam canner, it's like 10 minutes or something. Correct. Right. Okay, so we taste tested these yesterday, and actually the low temp was not as crunchy as the one that was done in the steam canner. And so in a way, that's kind of good news, because it means you save a lot of time. You don't have to go to all the extra work to get a crunchier pickle. And then let's see, this is Pickle Crisp. I've got the top of the screen is covering the title. Which one is this? This is
Mrs.
Mrs.
Wagers.
This is a Mrs. Wages one. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And that is one, it's one of, you can buy more than one brand of, it's a package that comes with all the stuff you need to pickle. And this was one that somebody really liked because they liked the flavor of it. But previously the pickles had been, let's say, somewhat limp. They tasted good, but they were kind of flexible. And these, they were done. And did you tell me, Colleen, that Diana refrigerated the cucumbers?
Yes.
Okay, so one of the added factors, this is what makes it non-scientific, folks, is these cucumbers were refrigerated prior to being made into pickles. And so that may have been a factor. In fact, it probably was a big factor. And then one of the jars was with pickle crisp, and one of them was without the pickle crisp. And if I remember correctly, we decided the pickle crisp they were both crunchy, but the pickle crisp was crunchier. So it won the contest yesterday on that. This is this is the kosher dill pickles. And one of the things that will be posted on your stuff is there's a little PowerPoint I did on how to make kosher dill pickles, and it's got the recipe for the kosher dill pickles in it. And one jar was with pickle crisp and one jar was without pickle crisp. And there was a definite difference in the crunchy. The pickle crisp was crunchier. They were both okay, but the pickle crisp one was a crunchier pickle. And then this one went astray because it was supposed to be the difference between iced cucumbers and regular cucumbers that had not had anything. But the second batch of the ones that were not in ice were actually in the refrigerator. And so they were, and I think they were in the refrigerator for longer, right, Colleen?
Yes.
They were in the refrigerator for longer, and they both came out crunchy. But in this case, the ones that were in the refrigerator longer were crunchier.
Right.
So
Crunchier than the ice, yeah.
crunchier than the ice. Okay, so we'll go back there. And so I think our conclusion from our totally non-scientific testing routine that we did is that the things that seem to help were keeping them cold before making pickles. And I think we were pretty consistent about them being fairly fresh on the time from vine to brine. And then consistently the pickle crisp did add crunchiness to it. And the pickle crisp only uses, I think it's 1/8 of a teaspoon for a pint-sized jar, which is not very much of anything, but it does seem to make a difference. So if you want a crunchy pickle, these are some things you can do to get yourself a crunchy pickle. So I think I'm done with that, Bill.
So if you can stop sharing your screen.
Okay. No, wait a minute. Stop share. There's a red thing.
There you go.
Okay.
So now we're going to go to Colleen, and Colleen's going to cover a little bit about equipment and the kinds of equipment that you should be using when you are preserving your pickled product to be shelf stable. And there have been several questions about what you can use, what you can't use, and those kinds of things. So what Colleen is going to share with you now are two methods that we use as master food preservers. So Colleen?
Right. Yes. The first and probably the most common is the water bath canner. This is an enamel one. This is my show and tell, so I've got stuff in there. There will be a rack on the bottom. You don't want your jars to sit on the bottom of the pot. You always want it to be elevated, and not very much. This is maybe 1/8 of an inch, but you want to make sure that the jars are elevated. You need to make sure that your water goes 1 to 2 inches above the jars. So depending on whether you have a pint or a half pint or a quart, that will make a difference as to how much water you have in your jars or in your pot. The one thing with using a water bath canner is that you can add hot water.
Colleen and Bill?
Yeah.
We're seeing Bill, not Colleen.
Ah,
Okay, hold on. I can fix that easily. There you
there
go.
we go. So you want to make sure that your water covers your jar by 1 inch to 2 inches. You can add more hot water. You don't want to add room temp. You want to make sure you add boiling water to this if you have to add water. If you don't have a canner, you can make one with a tall pot. This one's a little short, but I can use it for a half pint jar. You need to make a rack for the bottom. And in this case, I took some lids, some rings that I tied together, and I put it in the bottom, put my jars on top. I would normally have a little bigger pot, but I loaned that to a friend of mine. So you still want to make sure that these are covered by an inch or two of water at all times. One of the questions was, can you use a tamale pot? And yes, you can. I have actually done that. The thing about the tamale pot was that there is more space at the bottom so that it takes that much water, much more water to cover your jars. My favorite container for canning is my my atmospheric steam canner. I don't think I've used my water bath since I got this. It only takes a couple of inches at the bottom of water. It has a rack that you set your jars on. And then mine has the gauge at the top, okay? On the gauge, there is a green section, and there's 3 different colors of green. Those are calibrated for your altitude. Mine went blank there. So because I'm at close to sea level, I would use the dark green section on the gauge. So I use this most of the time.
Colleen?
Yes.
One of the questions I think you should answer for everybody is somebody wants to know if they can use the tamale pot to steam in, and there's a good reason why they can't.
Yes. Well, there's no way to make sure the temperature is correct. So you don't, with the steam canner, you have, as your water heats up, you have all this area that you can't start counting your time. Soon as it's in the green, then you can, that's when you start timing your actual canning procedure. So if I started canning as soon as I saw some steam coming out, and there's a little hole here for the steam to come out, if I start timing as soon as that I see the steam, that is not the correct temperature. So that if I start counting when I see this for say 15 minutes, my pickles are not correctly processed and they could be very dangerous to eat. So you want to make sure that you use a canner for that to be safe. Okay.
People are really trying to find other containers to do this, and I'm answering a question about a pressure canner right now, and the basic answer is no.
Right. if you watch, I bought mine from Amazon, and I think I got it on sale for $40. So if you kind of watch, it'll come on sale. I think it generally runs $50.
I think I got mine for $35. So
okay, but I wouldn't even use my my water bath canner. You can can anything in here that takes 45 minutes or less. That doesn't need to be pressure canned. So this is what I use.
That's why you keep your water bath canner in case you have something that needs 45 minutes.
Right. That, and if I have something to dye, this is a perfect size for that. So anything 45 minutes or less that doesn't require a pressure canner can be done in the steam canner. It's you know, this gets really heavy. The water bath is really heavy. This only has, you know, a couple inches of water in it, and it's not a problem to haul around. And the procedure is the same. If something calls for 15 minutes in the water bath, 15 minutes in a steam canner. So the timing is the same. When you are canning something in the water bath, after your time is up and you turn off the stove, then you take the lid out and you let it sit for 5 minutes. The same with the steam canner. You take the lid off and you let it sit for 5 minutes. And then you just take it off very carefully, lifting the jars straight up and putting them on a towel, someplace that is out of the way and will not, someplace that won't get a lot of wind or breeze or anything. And you let it sit for 12 to 24 hours so that you can make sure that your jars are sealed. Just because your jar seals, just because you hear that pop, if you've not done it correctly, that doesn't mean that your food is processed. Your jars will seal if they get a little warm, or there's a lot of things that will make your jar sealed. That does not mean that it's processed correctly. So you want to be careful about that. One of the handouts that we're going to show you, I'm going to show you one of them here. Here we go. Okay, this is a handout that we're going to send you. And we've got some zucchini pickles, some carrots, some zucchini and pineapple. I can't see this bottom one here. Let's see if I can read it. Green beans, pickled beets, and just some information on canning. So this will be one of your handouts that you will be getting after we're done. So this will give you some other ideas for pickles. And so, you know, you don't have to just think of cucumbers when you are pickling, okay? Anything else? Any questions about?
I'm answering one right now, Colleen.
Okay.
The person and somebody from the class answered that it's faster, but it's only faster because the volume of water that you're raising to temperature is smaller. Processing time is still the same.
The same. The thing that it's faster about is it takes a lot of time to heat up this water. It takes not even close the amount of time to heat up this water.
Right. But if your recipe says 10 minutes processing time, it's 10 minutes processing
10 minutes,
time.
yes. Plus, this really heats up your kitchen. And when do we do most of our canning? In the summer. So the steam bath makes it's so much cooler. I'm not going to say, you know, that it doesn't heat it up, but it's a lot less heat because you've got, you know, this much water compared to 2 inches of water. Yes. So that's one of the things I really like about it.
Colleen, the other thing I would add is while we all have come to appreciate the steam canner as a way in which to process our foods, steam canner has a time limitation. And you can't process in a steam canner for longer than 45 minutes. And yes, there are some things that must be water bath canned for more than 45
minutes. Yeah. So you don't want to get rid of your water bath canner.
Exactly. Don't get rid of your water bath canner.
Right. And the reason that they give you a 45-minute time limit is because there is a possibility of running out of water, and you cannot take the lid out to add more water.
And it's really bad to run out of water.
Yes. Linda and I have both done that. So In the transition between water bath and steam, there was I have to say twice that, I heated up my jars and then I did a batch and then maybe I did another batch without adding more water so that I did run out. But I was very lucky. It was at the very end. So, but this is now my preferred, the steam. Okay.
Yeah. Let's see. Somebody asked what are some of the things that take 45 minutes, and off the top of my head, I think tomatoes take 45 minutes.
Yeah, I think.
And I'm not sure about what fruits and vegetables, but I'm pretty sure
I can't think of any.
Tomatoes can take up to 70 minutes.
Yes,
and some things take a long time, depending on whether you're doing, in tomatoes, in this particular case, if you're doing whole tomatoes as opposed to a tomato sauce.
Right, right.
And especially in quart jars.
Yes.
So sometimes the size of the jar mandates the length of processing time to be sure that the internal temperature is accurate. So if you're doing smaller jars, you can sometimes get away with, if you're using pints or less, you get away with a shorter processing time.
Yeah.
There's one here that someone asked, if you hear your jar lids pop and the lid is down and not raised, is it sealed properly? So if you've done everything correctly, if you've used your steam canner correctly, and if you used your water bath canner correctly, when you take the lid off of your steam canner, you're going to start to hear lids pop, which means that the vacuum seal is taking place. As Colleen said, you need to wait 24 hours and see if the seal is still intact, and to see if that's if the seal has taken place and then it is proper. Someone has down here, because of glass top stove, I worry about weight. You can't water bath can on a glass top stove because the weight of the water and the heat of the water can do some damage to your glass top stove. So the fact that you bought, in this case, Anna, a electric canner, that is okay to use. Just follow the directions going forward. Be sure you have the correct headspace when you're doing all of this as well. Someone said up here that they, when they're canning peaches, Suzanne says, I've had a problem with liquid coming out of the jars upon pulling the jars out of the water. The answer to that is, Suzanne, is to make sure that you have proper headspace. If you put too much liquid in, then what happens is, in the process of forming the vacuum seal, some of that liquid will come out and then it will go over the edges, and then you won't get a good seal on your jars anyway. So be sure to watch your headspace and watch your processing time.
Yeah.
Janet, we will answer your question as we get to the end of our presentation today.
I'll go be the science teacher here for a minute, Bill. The thing that I always want to make sure people learn is that the thing that's keeping the lid on the jar, the band is only keeping it in place. Okay, it's not intended to be the thing that's sealing the jar. The thing that's sealing the jar is the bond that's between the material that's on the inside of that lid and the jar top, which is why it needs to be perfectly clean so there's nothing in the way of that seal. But what we're really doing when we do all this processing is we are lowering the pressure inside the jar. And then when we return to normal atmospheric pressure, which at sea level is 15 pounds per square inch, which means that if you had the ability to have 1 square inch and you went all the way to the edge of the atmosphere, and you could take that 1 square inch and stick it on a scale, it would weigh 15 pounds. Okay, that's what's keeping the lid on the jar. And that's why at higher altitudes where there's less pressure, you have to go longer, because you don't get enough pressure on top of the jar. And so, when we're talking about doing all these things, all those things that mess with that, how much airspace are we trying to compress, you know, to get down? And everything else, it all becomes part of a process, and each one of those things is important. So making sure that seal is good, making sure that we don't screw with it after we've taken it out of the canner and everything. Those are things that they're not just happenstance. There's a reason.
So there's two other questions that have come up. Thank you, Linda, for that information. One of them is from Carol in regards to a glass top stove. And as I said to Carol, the best thing would be to use a steam canner because the pressure on the stove would be less. Anytime you're using a glass top stove, you also have to have a special water bath canner. Colleen, can you hold up the bottom of your canner for us real quickly? So, show us the bottom. So if you see the bottom of her canner, how it has ridges on it, that won't work for a glass bottom stove. You need to have a pot that has a smooth bottom on it. You can buy a water bath canner like that has a smooth bottom, but in order to get even temperature, you need to make sure that you have a smooth bottom to that. Debbie asks, the cost of lids have gone through the roof. What about reusable ones? Ones that are made to be reused, not normal lids. As master food preservers, Debbie, I'm going to tell you that we recommend that you use the ball or the Kerr two-piece lids with a lid and with a ring, and that when you are finished and when you pop open the product that you have, that lid is then no longer able to be used because it cannot get a good seal. There are lids out there and there are recipes that you will find, but when you're going to the reliable resources that we recommend, they're all going to recommend two-piece lids, and none of them are reusable.
Yeah, I think there's some research that is going on right now, but we haven't heard anything definitive.
That's correct. That's correct. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is both Linda and Colleen, we're going to talk a little bit about other kinds of things that you can or excuse me, that you can pickle other than just cucumbers. So I'll just let them go on and talk about what they have for us.
Okay. Do you want to start, Colleen, or do you want me to show my picture?
Why don't you start, Linda?
Okay, now if I can figure out how to get back to where. Okay, it's not. Oh shoot. Why don't you start, because it's going to take me a while to figure out how to.
Okay, all right. So you can pickle most anything. One thing I want to talk to you about is the brine that you have left. Okay, or maybe you have some pickles in the refrigerator and you use them all up, but there's still a lot of the juice. Don't throw that out. That can be reused. You can add some vegetables to this. I could put in, this happens to be some dill pickle brine that I had left. I could add some carrots in here, or celery, or just about anything that I want to pick up that little dill pickle juice. Now, if you do a sweet brine, like Linda's going to talk briefly about, I pickled some cherries, and it has a sweet brine to it. That brine is really good on ice cream. It has a sweet but tangy flavor to it, but I could also add some other vegetables or fruits to that, and it would pick that up. Now, these are only to be stored in the refrigerator. It's not shelf stable, but when you think about your brine, remember you can do other things with it. You could add this to a homemade salad dressing recipe. In particular, I've had several comments on the pickled cherries. I happen to have access to as many cherries as I can stand actually. And I don't really care for cherries, but I always do something with them. I always can them. And the cherry juice, you could make some very good salad dressing. You could also put it over a chicken to bake it, and that would add a nice little sweet and tangy flavor to that as well. How are you doing, Linda?
I am not doing well. I seem to have lost my PowerPoint and can't find it again.
Okay. Just go to PowerPoint and find it.
Well, I've been trying that, and it seems to have gone
Oh,
into
okay.
the nether world of not being found. So
Oh, I see.
I don't know what to
Melanie's
do. You
gloves.
talked about your cherries, and all I had on the
Yes.
PowerPoint was some pictures of some other things. Why don't you talk for a minute and I'll go grab jars.
Okay. Yeah, I see. Melanie says it's criminal. She loves cherries. I know. I love to pick them, and I give them away. I have people that, me. I'll take them. To me, picking the cherries is very relaxing, and I do enjoy that. But I'm not much of a cherry eater.
Hold on one second, Colleen.
Yeah.
We had a question that came in about reusing brine. Do you just insert raw vegetables or go through the heating process? The recommendation is if you're going to pickle something, you need to use fresh brine. You need to redo that. You can use the brine, like she said, as a topping for a meat, or you can use it as a topping on an ice cream. But it's not safe to reuse a brine to use other pickles. Keep in mind that when you start a batch of something that you're going to preserve, you always want to start from the beginning of the recipe as if you were doing it for the first time. And reusing a brine falls into that category of starting all over again.
Yeah. But if you want to put some vegetables in a brine that's in the refrigerator, you can do that. But you can't use it to pickle and process. That's not safe. So,
okay.
But,
I'm back. I have jars. They're not nearly as pretty as the pictures, but anyway. One of the things that I've made a lot of chutneys. Didn't know how much I liked chutney until we have a Jamaican place in this area, and they always serve chutney with their jerk chicken and stuff. And I found I really liked it. And I have determined that there is about as many different kinds of chutneys as there are people who make chutney, because everybody has a little bit of a different flavor they like or whatever. And one of my favorite ones that we've made at workshops is called Golden Gossip. And the reason it's called Golden Gossip is because it has 16 ingredients and there's a lot of chopping involved. So it's really great if you've got friends around and you make a batch together, because then you can gossip while you're chopping, and you make a really great chutney, and it goes really well with pork and turkey and everything else. My picture, you really can't see. All you can see is this jar, but this is cranberry chutney, which is really, really good with your Thanksgiving turkey, but it's also really good on ham sandwiches and turkey sandwiches. You can use it instead of mayonnaise, which that's a plus. And the same thing goes for that Golden Gossip. It's a great one. Bill had a really good picture of the corn relish. And as you can tell, there's a jar of corn relish in my refrigerator all the time. And Bill and Colleen both cringed when I told them how I use the corn relish the most. I use it on my scrambled eggs. And they thought that was a horrible thing, but I happen to think it's a really great thing. So, there's lots of flavors. Technically, a mustard is a pickle. because you're using vinegar in the process of making it. And you can make some mustards that you will not find in the store, and they are really good. There's some approved recipes for a cranberry mustard that is that nice cranberry color and is great to use and stuff. Another cranberry thing that is relishes are pickles. So there's a cranberry. You don't have to make relishes out of cucumbers. You can, but you can make it out of other things. And so cranberry relish is one of the things that I have in my refrigerator. And I've had a really great sweet zucchini relish. And then salsas are, you wouldn't think so, but they are. Salsas are pickle because you put salt and you put vinegar in them, and that's how you make it preserved. And as you can see, I like to eat my salsa because this is not a full jar. We're working on emptying the jar. Once again, it goes on my quesadillas, but I would also put that on scrambled eggs. You can wince now. And one of the things that I find really interesting, and this is differences in people's taste. One of my favorite pickles, I was getting ready, practicing for Christmas in a Can, one of our workshops, and I had seen a recipe for sweet pickled pumpkin, and that sounded really fascinating. So I was testing it. And when I was filling the jars, I'd cooked the pumpkin and I was filling the jars before processing them. It smelled so good. I said, I think I need to taste that. I had to make myself go back to filling the jars because it was that good. I was ready to sit and finish eating the pan myself. Neither one of my colleagues here likes sweet pickled pumpkin. I still like sweet pickled pumpkin. So, you know, it's possible for you to try something and say, I don't care for it, but then there's other things that you will care for. So I would say, and I think it's sort of a rule, if it sits still, you can pickle it.
So I think so.
If it sits still long enough, you can pickle it. So I'm not sure what else I have.
Is Bill there? I was going to show my pickled
Pickled cherry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bill, can you make me the speaker for a moment?
You are.
Well, I know, but I mean, there we go. I just want to show the my pickled cherries. Okay. This is what the jar looks like. The recipe calls for leaving the cherries whole with the stem. And I did that, but then I had a friend that gave me some cherries that either didn't have stems or they weren't real fresh and the stems had kind of dried up. So the last batch I did, I didn't have stems, and so I went ahead and pitted them too. So I just did these the other day, but I'm kind of anxious to see if there's a difference. Now this juice, it's funny, it looks like pickled beets, which is why we put what they are on the lid. You know. The juice is very tangy. It's very good on many different things. I am not an ice cream eater, but it is good on vanilla ice cream. One thing I want to say about the pickling and spices. This has clove, cinnamon stick, whole clove, cinnamon stick, and allspice, whole allspice. And it smells very Christmassy. It's got that holiday winter season smell to it. And it's everybody that I've given a jar to says, oh, it smells like Christmas. I found the clove to be a little overpowering for me. So the next time I made it, I used only half that amount. You can change the amount of any dry spice that you are using. So remember that if it's got a little bit of too much that you don't care for, reduce it. That's fine. And it's safe. Okay. Anything?
So thank you, Colleen. Let me go ahead and answer a few questions that are here. Someone asked about how do you find out about our future workshops, and one of the ways to do that, and thank you, Vicki, for posting our Facebook page. So if you can, you find our Facebook page, then you'll be able to find out the other events that we do. If you go on to our website, and the best way to go to the website is just Google MFP space SJC. It will take you to our website, and on our website you can find all of our previous events that we have done on berries and stone fruits and pressure canning.
And I think you can get access to those.
YouTube.
I think you can get access to those on our site, right, Bill?
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
Crystal, I don't have an answer for you on yours. Colleen briefly posted, held up a lid that she had labeled so she could tell the difference between her cherries and her her beets. And I'm going to say that a couple of things. Whenever you can something, pickling or otherwise, be sure to label what it is and be sure to put the date on it. Sometimes you find yourself with access to produce that you had a whole bunch of, and then you find yourself making a lot of something. I have 19 jars of cherry jam because somebody gave me 18 pounds of fruit. My wife and I will not eat 19 jars of cherry jam, so we're going to give it away. But remember, as master fruit preservers, in order to maintain quality, quality control issues, we recommend that once you can something, it's good for a year to get the maximum quality. And so from that, we want you to be sure that you maintain quality. And the only way to maintain quality is to put a date on it. And there are a lot of things that look alike, so label what it is. Otherwise, you might open something by mistake. I want to share something very quickly with you to show you something that will be a handout that we will give you. This particular handout has several recipes on it. As you can see, this one came from our friends in Central Sierra, and there are zucchini and baby carrots and a zucchini pineapple. There's also pickled beets and pickled dill beans that you can also process. And once you start looking, you'll find that there are all kinds of things that you can pickle. And the last thing I want to share with you, let me pull this up for you as we are getting close to our time allotment here, is problems. And no matter how good you are in following recipes, sometimes things just don't turn out exactly the way you want it to. So we're going to be sending you a handout from the National Center for Home Food Preservation that deals with some of the problems in pickling food. And one of the biggest ones is soft or slippery pickles. And as we told you earlier, the most common is that the blossom end has not been removed. So be sure that you do that. And then here are some others along the way. Strong, bitter tastes. Sometimes spices cook too long. Somebody asked in there, can you use pickling lime? And there is a recipe that allows you to use pickling lime to help with the crispness of pickles. But in my personal experience, it changed the taste. I had a very hard time getting the lime flavor out of my pickles. So Shriveled pickles, maybe you over process them. You know, sometimes when you process something that says 10 minutes and it's a jam or a jelly and you process it for longer than that, it really doesn't make a difference. But if you just think of that little 3-inch cucumber sitting in boiling water, you want to use minimum amount of time.
The recipe for the kosher dills, Bill,
Yeah,
tells you that they're going to shrivel, but that they will plump back up later.
good. So farther down here, you'll see there's some other ones. We're going to send this to you. We're going to send another handout along with it that deals with fermented pickles and problems that you might have relative to fermented pickles. And somebody has asked for us to post our website. So Linda, if you'll stall for me.
Yeah. One of the things somebody asked about the chutneys, and I'll try to make sure that a couple of those recipes get put with the stuff that you get for this. And I will probably, I'm going to be doing the gifts from the kitchen workshop in November. And I often choose a chutney as one of the things that we go through in that, because it's one of my favorite things to do. So we'll probably have some of those there, but I have, I think I've made about 6 different kinds of chutney so far, and I've yet to find one I didn't like. So
Great. Thanks for that perfect stall. I have posted the website that contains all of the information regarding our website. I know that there are tons of questions, and I'm not sure if we got everything. Yes, whoever asked, we will include Linda's golden gossip recipe in the handouts that we send out to you
And
next week.
the pickled cherries.
And we'll send out the
some
pickled
requests.
cherries as well. Let's see.
the difference between giving your stuff away and selling your stuff, and whatever, you know, when we're talking about the home license thing, we're only talking about California. We don't know what rules apply anywhere else.
Right.
And so, and I certainly wouldn't call myself an expert on there, but this is a word of caution to people. I think Bill has had more experience with this, but I think we all have done. When you're buying food from someone, ask them how they processed it, because I would eat anything Bill gave me, and I would eat anything Colleen gave me. But my list of people that I would absolutely trust is not that long. So
I have thrown stuff away.
yes.
Thank you
So,
very much.
yeah, and I think that's important. And Linda brings up a really good idea. I did go to a farmer's market, and I won't mention where I went to that farmer's market, but I did go, and someone had a beautiful array of jams and jellies, and beautiful jar, beautiful label, looked really great. I bought one because it looked really great. And when I thought at the last minute, because she didn't use the two-piece seal, I went back and asked her how she processed it, and she said she didn't. She just poured in the hot jam, screwed on the lid, turned it upside down, and then the next day turned it over, and the lid had sealed. And that's how she was selling her jam at the farmer's market. I brought it to one of our meetings and showed everybody how beautiful it was. And then we promptly threw it all away. You need to be very careful about the stuff you get from folks and how they did it and what process they use. And there's a lot of people that will tell you that they canned this, their grandmother canned it this way and nobody got sick. And our answer is yet. So anyway, I want to thank some of the folks that have chimed in for us. We have another gentleman, Daryl, who's a master food preserver from Santa Barbara that has chimed in on a couple of questions. And Daryl, thank you for identifying yourself as a master food preserver, so that we know we're giving out correct answers. Janet asked a question about when are we doing a 2021-22 class. And I will tell you that we will begin to put out publicity in August for a training class that we will start for new master food preserver volunteers. That will start in February of 2022. We don't have any details on days and dates yet, but if you're looking to spend 6 or 8 weeks with us and learn how to be a master food preserver volunteer, begin to earmark your calendar for February into March.
Bill, perhaps you could just take a minute or so to tell people what being a master food preserver is.
Sure.
It's not a canning club.
I can also answer Vicky's question. Our intent, Vicky, is that we're going to do this as an in-person class. But if we can't do an in-person class for whatever the reason may be, we will be doing a Zoom workshop. And then what that means is that if it's Zoom, you will have much more homework to do on your own, because it'll be difficult to do a lot of the lab work that we do for ours. I also wanted to tell you a little bit about it. As a master food preserver volunteer, you get to do workshops like this. We get to man a booth at a farmer's market and answer questions for the public that come through. Sometimes we do invitation only food preservation events. We have a monthly meeting that lasts for a couple of hours where we have a guest speaker on a canning process. And then
we go to libraries.
What's that?
We go to the libraries.
Yeah. So we do workshops for the public through libraries. We do them through clubs. We have a partnership with UOP here in Stockton. So there's lots of ways for us to be able to get out and spread the word about what we do. As part of the process, there will be an orientation meeting where we will tell you more about what we do in specifics. We'll be able to tell you the actual dates of when training is going to be, what it's going to look like, what the requirements are going to be, and then we can go from there.
And a question to answer is, must you be a resident in the county to take the training?
So the question is, we are a single county program at this point, and so you must be a resident of San Joaquin County in order to take our training. And last question I'll say about this to Naomi is that we have not determined the price yet, and mostly because we don't know what the prices are going to be when we begin to hold the workshop going forward.
And did you mention the 50 hours of volunteer time the first year?
So, no, I haven't done that part, and I didn't want to get into the weeds on that. And as Daryl has mentioned, some counties do accept neighboring county residents, but to retain your current certification, you have to do your volunteer hours in our county. Currently, we do not have that policy. Our policy right now is we are San Joaquin County only, and all of the volunteer time that you do has to be done within San Joaquin County unless it is pre-approved, and we go from there. The last thing I would like to say before we say goodbye to all of you is our next workshop coincides with the peak of tomato season here in the Central Valley, and that will be a workshop on tomatoes. And we will tell you all about ways in which you can process and preserve, and the different methods by which you can process and preserve tomatoes, those that you grow or those that you get from a farmer's market. So with that, I want to thank you all for being with us today. One day next week, you'll get all the handouts. You'll get a copy of this recording, and we appreciate everybody being there. And I just want to say thanks to Colleen and thanks to Linda for the work that they did putting this together. And for those of you that have asked questions, thank you very much. And Daryl, thank you for identifying yourself as an MFP and helping us with some questions. Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend. Try and stay cool. And maybe we'll see you on our August workshop.